Here's your host, political insider, George Burke.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia tonight. We are doing a show that's not quite political, although it's very political in some ways. We're going to be talking about the Tyson's land force. Good evening. I'm George Burke. I'm your host for Inside Scoop, Virginia. Normally we talk about politics here. Tonight we're going to be talking about an issue that's very political, but deals with a very important issue that's central to Fairfax County's future, and that is the future of Tyson's Corner. I have two guests I'm very happy to have with me tonight. Bill Likos, who is the president and CEO of the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce, and John Jennison, who's the former chair president of the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations. He's a political activist here in the county, and he serves as the Citizens and the Civic Associations rep on the committee that has been dealing with this issue. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you, George.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Let's talk first about how did this start? I mean, I don't think there's anybody in Fairfax County who will disagree that Tyson's at this point is a mess. There's tons of traffic. You can't walk to lunch. It's certainly, on the positive side, it's the economic engine in many ways of Virginia. And it has an incredible amount of office space. It's very much an economic base nationally even. It compares to some very large cities around the country. But no one will disagree that some changes have to be made. I think there's probably been a lot of debate, and you folks have been in the middle of it, on what those changes should be. So how was this process started to do this plan?
Well, George, that's a good question, and the viewers would like to know that Fairfax County doesn't stay static. They're constantly looking ways to improve what's going on. And Tyson's, as you said, is an economic engine for not only for Fairfax County, but the entire state. And the county looks at their plans and how to improve things. There have been previous task force in the past of what the future would be for some of these developments. And Tyson's was really the gem of Fairfax County, and they were looking to see what the citizens wanted to do and what the government wanted to do in the future for the landowners and to make it a better place.
So how was this task force formed? Board of Supervisors, who formed the organization or this committee?
Well, the planning does come under the Board of Supervisors, and they were the ones who put together this 36-member task force of stakeholders. They were landowners, they were citizen activists, there were a lot of the agencies and areas that had representatives, the conservation movement had representatives. I'm serving with the Federation of Citizens Associations. We were represented, as well as several of the neighborhoods are out there. There's also some private sector landowners representation, and Bill anchored the Chamber of Commerce representation.
Representing the business interests,
The
obviously.
employers and the employees who
no
work
doubt.
in Tyson's.
Who else was on the committee? We have some, I understand Clark Tyler was the chair. He's been around for some time. He's been an activist. He's in his early 70s, and it became very much a full-time job for him over that period of time. Unpaid, I may add.
Well, it did, and what's nice is this is a Monday evening that Bill and I have free for the past several months because we've been meeting at such a fast and quick pace under Clark's orders. But what's nice about the task force is everything has been open and transparent. That had concern on what was going on, affordable housing. There's been a website on the county website. There's a website dedicated to it on the county website just about the task force, identifying the over 45 meetings, public meetings the task force has had, and including workshops since January 2006. And at these 45 workshops and meetings, over 2,000 citizens have come and participated. Along with that, all of our meetings were open to the public. All the minutes are posted on the website of the county. So there's been a lot. And to answer your question, these 36 members, and there were some very bright bulbs around this table. There's a nice glossary of a nice identification of all the members. And the resumes they bring to it is quite eye-opening. We had some really intelligent people bringing a lot of breadth of experience to the table to talk about what we wanted out of Tyson's in the future.
Yeah, there were a couple of interesting developments in this process as the task force really took ownership of the process and the outcome. And one of the things was we were brought together under the statutory requirements of comp plan revisions. But it didn't take the task force long to come to the consensus that a 5-year solution for Tyson's wasn't going to shape Fairfax's future. So we quickly, expanded the viewshed, so to speak, on this plan from 5 years, which is the statutory limit on a comp plan, to really a planning window to 2050. We took the long view. Second thing is we realized, in addition to the wonderful contributions from the members of the task force and the diverse experience that they each brought to the table, that we were going to need some real experts in urban planning. And when you're talking about transforming Tyson's into a vibrant, world-class urban center, that's not something that we've ever done in this county. So we went outside and, in a competitive process, engaged a consulting team that are literally the finest urban planning folks in the country. Folks like Robert Savaro, who's at Berkeley and has written the book on transit-oriented development. PB Placemaking, which is a firm that has gone through these transformations in other places, and Portland-based, and Portland is often seen as a real model for the livable community. So we brought in experts onto the task force. We brought in experts from around the world, and the task force then went about the business of distilling all of that information into something that was very Fairfax.
I imagine that a lot of the consultants, first of all, because of what Fairfax is. Second of all, because of the magnitude, I think, of the transformation that's being talked about. I mean, you already have a city of sorts that has over 100,000 employees, 105,000 people working there now.
Well, that's a good point, George. And Fairfax, what Tyson's does not have, that most cities has, is a river. And what we do have is a nice beltway, and that's what Ken Lawrence, one of the planning commissioners, told us. We have a beltway, but the raison d'etre for the task force was the Metro Rail coming in, the 4 stations coming in.
Would have been very interested in participating in this project.
And how to harness the growth, the economic growth that those 4 stations were going to bring in. And we wanted to get ahead of the curve here. We wanted to partner up with the landowners and make a Tyson's that not only took advantage of that metro coming in, but also take care of this opportunity, take advantage of the opportunity to turn it into a real city, and not some place that people just went to and left when their work was done, or not some place that people just went to perform their retail shopping.
I know I'm getting off the beaten path a little bit, and in the next segment I'm going to have Bill give a presentation that's part of a presentation that you sometimes deliver. But there was a lot of debate over whether the Metro Rail should go via tunnel or go above ground. And I think the reality of the matter was that virtually everybody said, hey, a tunnel would be a great idea, but it wasn't feasible relative in terms of the federal government, in terms of getting the money. I followed that part of the issue very closely. How much did that impact the deliberations as that debate was going on?
Well, the debate was clearly something everybody was mindful of, but it was in essence on a parallel track. And bear with me, because I'll try to throw as many rail analogies in as I can this evening. Our task, though, was to transform Tyson's when rail got there, whether it came underground or came above ground. At the end of the day, it's about the transformation. And while I don't think anybody I've ever talked to wouldn't have preferred the underground option, as the rail process went through its approvals, it was evident that that was not affordable. So that really wasn't our task, but our task was, regardless of how it came, to prepare Tyson's for that day, and that day is not very far off.
Now, one of the things you did was look at the history of Tyson's. I mean, you looked back before you looked forward. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. And for those who have moved into the area, and a large part of the population have moved in, and they're not Fairfax natives, original natives like Bill and myself, who grew up in this area right down the street, Route 7 on Tyson's.
Carpetbaggers like that.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But 50 years ago, Tyson's was a small intersection, a couple of roads, mostly farmland, and provided dairy products to the nation's capital. And as it has grown, things have changed tremendously. And we can't sit back and say, okay, we're done. Nothing else is going to happen. We have to look forward. What have we learned from the past? What unintended consequences happen from this development, and how can we go forward and, again, harness this growth, harness this economic engine, and make it a better place to be?
You know, when Tyson's grew, George, it's, you know, anyone who suffers through some of the traffic or the things today, it's very easy to say, what were they thinking? But, you know, it evolved over the last 50 years, and in many ways it was the right ideas for the right times, but the times have changed. It did create, first of all, a wonderful retail center where none had existed to serve a growing bedroom community 30 years ago. It created jobs and brought jobs out to near where people lived and took advantage of what at the time was state-of-the-art transportation infrastructure. We call that the Beltway or the toll road. Those are asphalt. But I mean, Tyson's grew up in those conditions. We've now reached a change in the times where moving forward we have to find the Tyson's that's appropriate. The daunting task that the task force has dealt with is somebody said it was akin to a surgeon doing heart surgery while the patient was still on the treadmill. So, you know, we couldn't shut it down, we couldn't wipe it clean, and we couldn't, quote, start over. We had to create a transformation of Tyson's, and that's what that was the daunting task and what made it so interesting.
What prompted the existence of Tyson? Was it the proximity to the Beltway? Was it the being on Route 7? I mean, what was it? Was its location within Fairfax County? How did Tyson's grow? How did it emerge initially?
Tyson's today is a creature of the Beltway.
Yeah.
When the Beltway came in the 60s, some people recognized that intersection of the Beltway, Route 7, and Route 123 was going to be a great place. And in the context of particularly putting a retail. And then when the retail was there, then jobs followed, and that's what drove it. It was built for cars.
And what Bill says is absolutely correct. And if you look at the geography where you see the Beltway and you see Route 7, you see 123, and you see the convergence of all these routes for transportation, you can see why people purchase that land as speculators, built things that they had a vision, they built things. And many of us locals, that's where you went to do your Christmas shopping. That's where you went to see the first movies to come out. And it just is grown as first there's one, and then there's another, then there's another. And that's it's been a really successful retail operation as well as a job creation.
One of the things that we became aware of, George, as a task force when we look back, one of the things that didn't happen in Tyson's Corner, though, was while the rest of the county over the last 40 some odd years went from about 250,000 people to over 1 million, very few of those people actually lived in Tyson's Corner. Today there are about 17,000 people that live in Tyson's out of 1.1 million that live in Fairfax County. So clearly, the one thing it's really missing now and what will define the success of Tyson's moving forward is people. Bringing people in there to live and making it a place. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep. Well, we are going to take a look at what the committee did when we get into our next segment in a couple of minutes. I just want to remind you that our phones are open tonight at 571-749-1166. My guests are Bill Likos, Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce, and John Jennison, who represents citizens on the committee that are making recommendations relative to Tyson's Corner. So I hope you'll stick with us. Give us a call if you have any questions. These are the guys that can answer them for you. And we will see you in 2 minutes after we take our break. Thanks for watching.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me.
There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY.
You get paid for this,
In
don't
times
you?
of crisis, hope is just a phone call
salary.
away. 1-800-RUNAWAY.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are...
Welcome back to Inside Scoop, Virginia. My guests today are Bill Likos, President and CEO of the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce, and John Jennison, who's the former president of the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations and represents the Federation on the committee that has been dealing with Tyson's planning. Bill, I'm going to hand this thing over to you. You have a presentation, or part of a presentation that you have been delivering around the county that the consultants have presented in a number of places in more detail. But I think for our viewers, it would give them a feel for what you folks have been doing. So if we can get started, I'd like you to run through this presentation for us.
George, these are just a small excerpts of the presentation made by the consultants that were hired by the task force that helped draft this plan. And the most critical point, I think, moving forward, summarized, is the Tysons tomorrow will be a place built for people and not cars. And for the last 40 years, cars have defined Tyson's Corner, and that has to change. Key points for the task force is it wasn't just about making Tyson's bigger. It had to be better. The goal is the top 10 U.S. downtown. Currently, Tyson's Corners is about the 8th or 9th largest office market in the United States. We're as big an office market as Cleveland or a Miami, but we lack the other elements that define a real vibrant downtown. So we had to make Tyson's a place people wanted to live. It had to be defined by green stewardship. There are so many opportunities in transforming Tyson's to improve our water conservation, restore our streams, apply the technologies that make buildings more efficient, that use less energy. This is a real chance to define Fairfax County by its environmental stewardship. We had to make it a civic heart of Northern Virginia, not just a business center and a retail center, and that had to be built around transit and walking. The vision of the task force: a great place to live, work, and play, a world-class downtown, prestigious, iconic offices, plus a housing mix that includes substantial affordable housing. People-oriented streets. Today the streets are for cars and cars alone, and I think anybody who's tried to experience Tyson's at the street level knows that it is a daunting, if not dangerous, task to try to cross those streets. We had to make the mass transit convenient, even more convenient than just the 4 stations would provide, and it had to provide a variety of open spaces and civic uses, the things that draw people out of their buildings and into face-to-face contact. There were 4 real drivers of the plan moving forward. Create a people-focused urban center. redesign the transportation network. And that goes much further than just having a metro and 4 stations. It means a grid of streets that are walkable, a streetscape that's enjoyable, streets that support complete use. In other words, that are as friendly for bicycles as they are for automobiles. And one of the things the task force adopted was a commitment to adding a circulator into Tysons, because Tysons is a really large area at 1,800 acres, but a circulator that would provide more mass transit contact for folks to use that rail system. In other words, even if you're not within an eighth or a quarter of a mile of the metro station, but if you're out on the circulator, you'll be able to get some fast, flexible, free, hopefully, access to the metro that'll encourage people to leave their cars at home. I mentioned earlier the strong emphasis on the environment, and perhaps the most important change is increasing the residential balance in Tysons. When we talk about residential balance, we're talking about that balance of jobs to people. Today, Tysons has about 9,000 households, give or take, and 105,000 jobs. That's less than a 10-to-1 ratio. The Tysons of tomorrow will have a 3-to-1 ratio of jobs to people.
We've seen so many civic centers around the country where the streets roll up at 6 o'clock because nobody lives down there.
Exactly.
And certainly planners around the country have more and more been pushing the mixed use and pushing getting people to move back into urban settings in terms of energy efficiency, saving energy and the like, making those areas livable, making them friendlier in the evening, et cetera, and making them all around vibrant, I guess is how you describe it.
That's a good point, George. In Crystal City, for example, they came out with transit-oriented development years ago, but it found it to be a place nobody would hang around to at night. So they did recently go through a retrofitting of the entire complex, making the streets 2 ways instead of 1 way, and putting out retail establishments along the walkways and making larger sidewalks so people can come out and do things. They've added arena stage in there, just an example of them trying to bring vibrancy to Crystal City. And the retrofitting is taking a long time. And this is something we wanted to do, and I think the county wants to do with Tysons when the metro comes in, to be ready for it, to have plans to go forward. And one of the big components is the grid of streets. Bill's going to talk about that now.
Yeah, John, John mentioned earlier that the predicate for the task force work was metro, and I guess the most funding planning precept was to maximize the benefit of that rail. So most of the intensity shown in the slide of the new Tysons will be around the transit stations. In fact, 95% of the new growth will be within an easy walking distance. And the task force created a tiered approach where at the metro station, literally within 1 block of the metro station is where the highest, tallest buildings will be, and it'll tier down from there so that by the time you get to the edges, one of those 6 principles that John talked about that started the task force work is that at the boundary with the adjoining neighborhoods, that won't change from today, because we want Tysons to be a good neighbor. We need to provide the options. John mentioned the grid of streets. We think about streets in our tradition, and we think about cars. Streets are in fact the lifeline upon which you walk, you bike, and you connect. The difference between Tysons today, for example, and Clarendon today, is if your office is in Clarendon and you walk outside, you can walk down a number of street choices to go to that restaurant, to pick up your dry cleaning. You don't have to get back in your car. Today in Tysons Corners, you rely on your car to move everywhere. Residential, absolutely critical, and spread throughout Tysons. That means not only will there be mixed-use residential at the metro stations, but the areas that are much further away, those areas that adjoin some of the neighborhoods today, for example, will be a much lower level of intensity, but it will be residential. Also critical in the residential mix for the task force is affordability, housing choices. The task force has created a plan that will require all residential developers to put 20% of the units into workforce housing. So folks who are working at the malls aren't going anywhere. They will be able to live here. The folks who are supporting those office jobs, they'll be able to live in Tysons, and we'll have a range of housing choices so that everybody can take advantage of this transit-oriented lifestyle. Green stewardship, we talked a little bit about some of the key elements of that. There'll be a network of parks and open space, I think 160 acres of parks. Now those will range from a relatively large 8 to 10 acre park and some public performing spaces and those sorts of things, but also pocket parks, kinds of things that you just want to get out of your office or out of your house, or you want to take the dog for a quick stroll, kinds of things to break up that cement background that we're very familiar with today. Stream restoration, we talked about green architecture and green buildings. This is a chance to define Fairfax environmentally.
Speaking about the buildings, I read somewhere that some of these structures could go as high as maybe 30 stories.
Oh, easily. Well, Fairfax County today has 30-story buildings that aren't attached to mass transit. The key, though, is it's not taller, it's not bigger, it's better. Now, where it will be tallest, and let's say it's 30 stories, let's say it's 40 stories, that's within one block of the metro station. And then it'll come down to a lower level as you're a quarter mile away, and even lower when you're a third of a mile. And finally, when you're at a half a mile, you'll be at the levels that are very much at scale and blend to the neighborhoods. At the end of the day, that kind of height, the whole intensity of Tyson's, is akin to what we already see today in this community. It's Ballston. It's Clarendon. That's the level of intensity that's reflected in this plan. So it's not some overwhelming, intimidating, we're not bringing the Chrysler building down. It might be available, but we're not redoing the Chrysler building. The results of the vision and kind of quick summary points, first of all, is 95% of that development's within walking distance of mass transit. It's an urban center that balances jobs and residents. It improves the housing balance. It's sustainable Tyson's. It's a green place. And the urban streets are for walking and the variety of housing that'll be available. And again, this is the vision that we trust will drive it. There are recommendations for implementations, but the key thing to remember, and we actually engaged George Mason University to help with this final point, is none of these plans are going to happen tomorrow. This is something that you'll begin to see the transformation about the time Metro Rail arrives, and it will happen over 40 years. So this is not some magic inflatable city that's going to be plopped down, but rather something that we will grow to. That was very important to the task force, to understand that timeline and to understand that to achieve these wonderful objectives, we needed to first nail down the vision and make that our commitment. You can plan it by the numbers. We plan Tyson's today by the numbers, but the numbers will change. Vision can be constant. And you asked if we looked backwards, George, and the task force did learn some lessons. Fairfax, we've done many things well.
Let's stick with that thought. We're going to have to take a break at the half hour. A couple of things. Our telephone number is 571-749-1166. We also have a blog now. It's www.InsideScoopProductions.com. I hope that you'll avail yourself of those resources, and stick with us when we come back after the 2-minute break. We'll talk some more about Tyson's Corner with Bill Likos of the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce and John Jennison of the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations. Thanks for watching.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No, of 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. We're talking about Tyson's Corner today, the future of Tyson's Corner. My guests are Bill Likos of the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce, President and CEO, and John Jennison, the former President of Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations and the association's rep on the Tyson's Task Force. We were talking during the break about how the vision, how important vision is to this project. And you had suggested that part of it is looking at how Reston had a vision and how Reston developed.
Right, George. In our backyard, we have Reston, which is also a success story. And the way they put Reston together, which was dairy farms as well, was the county got together and found out what they wanted in Reston as a self-contained town. And it's the same way that we took the vision of Tyson's and organic growth. What is it that it was identified we wanted in Tyson's? And that's where some of these over 2,000 participants come into these 45 workshop and meetings we had, asking the residents, what do you want? What do you think would serve the interests of the area? And they did something very similar to that in Reston. And what they created there was just a wonderful place to live. So they have the lakes, they have the walking areas, they have the retail, they have a lot of housing there. And that's kind of the roadmap, if you will, that Tyson's wanted to follow of how to get the citizens to look at it, study it, and come up with a plan and see that vision that they have and see what they could do to implement it. They did very well in executing in Reston, and it's along that spirit that we try to take to Tyson's, at least the Board of Supervisors did. Now, when you say that I represent the citizens, what happened was all the members of the Board of Supervisors picked representatives to the task force. So there's a lot of citizens, a lot of neighborhoods that are represented on the task force, some in immediate proximity to Tyson's as well. So, but that was the backdrop, or that was the template that we kind of looked at how the task force had done in Reston and how to use that for Tyson's.
I imagine that the hardest sell on this whole project in some ways was probably to those who already lived there. Live on the fringes.
I don't know. It was interesting. I think some of the best contributions came from those folks because they live it every day, and you don't have to remind them that you can't walk anywhere in Tyson's. You don't have to remind them that you have to get in your car to go grab a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I mean, they understand that. So I think some of the best contributions in terms of the kind of place they wanted came from the folks who either live in Tyson's or are next to it. And one of the in my view, somewhat remarkable points of consensus that out of the process John spoke of was the task force listening to the community say what kind of place we want it to be, and then working with the expertise of the consultants and the folks on the task force to adopt an organic plan, a plan that said, okay, how do we embed enough in the economics? Because after all, it has to make sense or it doesn't get built. So how do we make economic sense of this in such a manner that we can require everything that gets built to contribute to the future of Tyson's? That's a big change from how we normally do development in Fairfax. Normally, you sit down, you go in, you got your project, and there's a negotiation to get to some end game. In this particular case, we've defined the end game. Now we've told you what your requirements are. Now the developer has to come in and make the appropriate contribution while building their project.
George, you raised a very good point. Some of the questions that were raised about the task force and how they went about it were answered by the task force members themselves, who wanted to protect the integrity of the neighborhoods around the surrounding Tyson's. And a great deal of discussion was done on height limitations near the neighborhoods and near certain areas that were very sensitive to growth. And nobody was shy about speaking about these things at the task force. And it's actually remarkable. Clark Tyler did a great job going around, bringing everybody in. Now, we didn't have unanimous consensus on everything, but the idea of protecting what we had around those areas and then trying to organically grow what we wanted to a better Tysons was actually a great process to be a part of.
You know, you have some very high rent neighborhoods not far from Tyson's Corner, on several sides of Tyson's Corner. And so I imagine that the folks who live there, you know, certainly improvements at Tyson's Corner benefits everybody, including those people who live in those areas, and it benefits everything from their property values to their quality of life.
George, we have a little bit of a roadmap to go through. You know, if you talk about high rent neighborhoods, I don't think there are higher rent neighborhoods than North Arlington. And you look at those single family home communities that are literally a stone's throw off the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, and we know from that it is not only possible to do the kind of transit-oriented development that occurred within the corridor, but you can do it in a manner that absolutely protects and preserves those terrific neighborhoods. And today, you know, I think the best of both worlds for a lot of folks are the neighborhoods in North Arlington, where they have the benefits of the traditional single-family home and the old trees and the great community ties, and they can walk, you know, to Clarington. They can walk into
and they can walk to
vibrant
eat,
neighborhoods.
and they can walk to work, so to speak, by jumping
George,
on
they're
Metro.
walking the Metro, and they're using Metro. In fact, one of the things we've seen in Arlington is in that corridor with the folks who've chosen to live in the Roslyn-Ballston corridor. Now there is less than one car owned per household.
That
for
was
those
just
households.
what I was going to ask. And these are very affluent, in general, very affluent
Well,
households.
compared to that to Fairfax County today, where it's about one car per driver per household, and you can see that that the lifestyle, you know, really does make a difference in people's choices.
There have been times at my house where I've had 5 cars parked regularly in my driveway. Not anymore, thank God, but you know, everybody had to have a car.
But George, we're also talking about the change in the culture that people have about getting around, the transit culture. And they have that in Arlington. They've adapted to it. It's evolving to this day, and it's going to grow. And that's the opportunity Fairfax County has at Tyson's. We have these 4 transit stations coming in, as well as transit going all the way out to Dulles. And again, it's an opportunity to change the culture. Now, we're not going to solve all the sins of Tyson's Corners. We still have a lot of problems with traffic that Tyson's has nothing to do with. It's sort of a bottleneck of going across the river into Maryland. And that's some things we can't take care of. But we can take care of that great imbalance that exists in Tyson's Corner. And that alone will go a long way of keeping our head above the water. And while it's not going to get gridlocked, there's going to become some congestion. There's no hiding the fact. We've talked about it. But the change is going to be remarkable, but it's going to take decades. And it's going to be an interesting thing to watch as it evolves.
You know, at the end of the day, the worst thing we could do is nothing, because nothing means more of the same. Tyson's isn't going to go back to a dairy farm, and the plan that's there today allows for 50% more of what we already got. And I think if you don't like what you got, you don't want more of it. And so doing nothing wasn't a choice. We create a vibrant, livable urban center, and it's a place where the jobs can go. You know, folks can't imagine sometimes when you mention this, but Steve Fuller from the George Mason University and John McLean out there, you know, we're going to have as much growth in Fairfax County over the next 30 years as we've had in the last 30. People are like, that's stunning. Where are we going to put these folks? Well, we got 2 choices. We change and we focus that growth where they can be best served, Tyson's, or they go outside. And if they go past Loudoun County, if they go to West Virginia, if they go to Spotsylvania, they're coming to Fairfax anyway. They're coming by car, and the environment takes the hit, the housing costs take the hit, the jobs take the hit. You know, so there just isn't a reasonable alternative than figuring out how to do this better.
George, there's a lot of challenges here, and I think Fairfax County is accepting this challenge, and the task force's vision does that. We're talking about a place that has huge amounts of impermeable surfaces, the parking lots alone. What the task force plans to do is require green buildings, total recapturing that runoff, the stormwater, and turn it into a pre-forested area. Now that's the type of a technical term that I've learned on the task force, as we've learned a lot of terms of as the best practices have been brought to us and shown to us and how we can adopt those. So these are things, we're having green buildings that the energy consumption is just going to be a fraction of what it is today. The use of water is just going to be a fraction of what it is today. The use of power is going to be still a good constant, but if you look at things that we did not have 20 years ago and extrapolate that 20 years in the future, it's ours to take care of, it's ours to grab. And the ring is there for Fairfax County, and Tyson's going to be part of it.
What John mentioned, all the things we've learned, and this show isn't long enough to go into them, but one of the aha moments was, and I give Clark Tyler great credit for this, we talk about Tyson's being a place that today is built for cars. 40 million square feet of Tyson's Corners today is in parking. 167,000 spaces. I mean, that's, we've taken better care of our cars than we are our people. There's no question about it.
That's funny. Will we see more lots that are built up? Is that part of I mean, you're still going to have places to park cars.
Under,
up
wrapped,
and underground, yep.
But not acres and acres of, as John refers to it, this impervious surface, this asphalt that does nothing but collect cars and run pollution into the streams.
But what you will see, and as some of the trade-offs with the landowners are to build these green spaces, perhaps a 10-acre park, 160 acres of open green space, some of it private, some of it public. But that's the trade-off that we're doing to increase the density, to make the intensity a place that people want to go to.
Now, how do you enforce the plan? I mean, will this be incorporated into zoning law and regulations as it deals with Tyson's Corner area? How will it be?
I mean, it is in the the same way all zoning and land use is defined in Commonwealth and in Fairfax. It'll be in the comp plan. There'll be planning language, and there'll be specific zoning language based on this plan. I think the key point, and my good friend mentioned it earlier, it's a cultural shift and it's a political culture issue. We have to have the same commitment. It just has to be part of what's expected when you're elected in Fairfax, that you're going to sustain the commitment to Tyson's over the next 50 years. Now, we've got some terrific ideas on helping the implementation, on creating an implementation authority, on using some business improvement districts and other strategies. But at the end of the day, it's a commitment of the elected leadership. And Arlington did it. So, I mean, that's a sustainable commitment.
Fairfax County used to be, if you blinked, you saw a new development in some part of the county. But actually, if you look at this cultural change, if you blink, you're going to miss something. If you go to one of the local metro stations that we do have, it's full of bicycles all over the place, locked up at every possible place. If you go on the metro during the off hours, not the peak hours, there's a lot of people using the transit to get back and forth, both downtown. So
shopping,
evolution is going on, and it's actually it's fun to watch. It's to be part of this area that's grabbing the future and making this change.
I think this political commitment has already begun, just based on the fact that with the daunting prospect of changing Tyson's before the Board of Supervisors, they chose not to treat this like a regular project, in one district, we're going to work it through the normal channels. They created this task force. They said it was a countywide task force. This is a countywide issue. Tyson's will shape the future of Fairfax County. And the fact that they've started with a political commitment of all 10 members, I think speaks very well of the likelihood of sustaining that commitment.
Not only is it a commitment, political commitment, but it has to be a partnership with the landowners. It's very nice for the citizens to say, this is what I want you to do with your land. It's not going to work in Virginia. What we have to do in the county's approach and the task force's approach is, let's make a partnership to make sure it's a good deal for everybody. And everybody's going to be proud of this.
Obviously, the density, we're going to have to take a break here, but obviously the density is attractive to folks who are developing properties because they're able to put more people into those areas, and there's got to be more profitability coming out of that.
One tool.
Yeah. We're going to take another break. We will be back in 2 minutes. My guests are Bill Likos and John Jennison. We're talking about Tyson's future. Stay with us.
Out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
Often by a family member or loved one.
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. We're talking about the future at Tyson's Corner, and it's a tall order to say the least. Bill Likos, the President and CEO of Fairfax County Chamber.
This is
around the world.
Chamber of Commerce. John Jennison, the former President of the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations, and the Civic Associations rep on that Tyson's panel are with me today. Bill, we were talking about the political side of this. The fact that you got all 10 members, not you, but that all 10 members of the Board of Supervisors have embraced this proposal. How did you do that? How did that come about?
Well, I think...
And you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year.
It started literally 3.5 years ago when under Chairman Connolly's leadership, and he brought his 9 colleagues together with the first consensus, which is a consensus of 10, that Tyson's is a Fairfax County issue, and that it was so important to managing the county's future growth, to the economic sustainability of Fairfax County, that it couldn't be treated as just another project. This was not a 2-acre strip mall on Columbia Pike someplace. This was really a defining opportunity. And that consensus has carried through with the board. On September 22nd, the report, the recommendations of the task force were received unanimously by the Board of Supervisors, and it will now go into the formal approval process. The recommendations, which are very detailed, do need to be drafted on into area-wide plan language, and once that area-wide plan language is adopted, then the sub-areas also need to be written. But I think I know the board asked that this be done expeditiously, and since we've spent 3.5 years getting to this point, we know that expeditious does not mean another 3.5 years. So we hope in the next 6-7 months that this will be wrapped up. And that's critical, George, because rail's coming, and we have to have a plan in place so that the initial construction that's going to be required to meet up with those rail stations and those first passengers getting off the metro come 2013, those buildings are done.
I want to talk some more about the process, but just a quick question. If citizens of Fairfax County, or anyone else for that matter, wants to take a look at this plan, it's up on the Fairfax County government's website, I presume. Is it on the Chamber's website?
No, it's on the county website.
It's on the county website.
/Tysons.
And indeed, it's been so open, there's been so many comments about it, and actually there's been a lot of endorsements by all the local newspapers. The Washington Post just recently gave another glowing editorial of Tyson's task force and the future that can be done if we capture the vision. Just about every newspaper, the Examiner and others, have come out. And it's been a drop of, there's no real political party here. What you have is members of the board, open-minded ones like Linda Smith and Kathy Hudgens and John Faust, looking to see what do we have here, and let's make sure we get this thing right. So as far as politics, I don't think it's aside as much as governance. Good governance is coming forward, endorsing this, accepting this plan, and seeing now what the next step in this process is.
You know, and in addition to the embracing of these recommendations by the area press, you've also seen other community organizations really coming forth to endorse this program. Committee for Sustainable Tysons, the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society. You've gotten a number of the affordable housing organizations in Fairfax who played such a role in writing these recommendations, coming out and endorsing it. We've seen the arts community rally around the articulation in this plan for performing spaces and public meeting areas. So this is really, now that the task force has done its job in reaching consensus, now we're seeing the really diverse elements of the community coming together to saying, you know, this is a better Tysons. And at the end of the day, that's, you know, when you've spent the time that John and I and 34 of our colleagues have, you know, it's very rewarding to get a sense that you hit it right.
And virtually everybody on, the 36 of you, weren't there for compensation. You were there giving many hours of your time, hundreds of hours from what I understand.
Well, I think there was 150 meetings of the task force.
Yeah.
So,
and about 2.5 hours each.
Late into the night. Everybody brought something to the table, and it was quite a feast we had. And it's still going on. You know, Fairfax County has a history of task force, and I'll tell a little story about the Federation. A couple years ago, Tom Davis gave a great speech at one of our Citizens of the Year banquets for Sally Ormsby. And Tom said, the strength of Fairfax County governance was the citizen task force. And he lamented that he wished the federal government had citizen task force to get the job done, to identify problems, to come up with recommendations with solutions. And I think that has been the history of Fairfax County, and it's been taken on and continued by the Board of Supervisors, chaired by Jerry Conley with his leadership.
So, process, where do we go from here in terms of this process? I mean, are there going to be public hearings? Are they going to, how's the process evolve?
Well, it goes like all land use issues. The next step is for the staff to draft the language, and that shouldn't take worked out for the area-wide plan. The community needs to do their part in becoming more informed. John talked about the website. It's absolutely critical. You can't really appreciate the depth of these recommendations if you don't see them online and in color. I mean, you got to see the maps, you got to see the allocation. You have to understand the relationships of what's put where and why that improves access to transit. And then the Planning Commission will go through its process and have the public hearings, and the board will vote at the end of the day.
There, of course, has been some criticism. Even before the report came out, there were some maybe flat earth NIMBYs out there, you know, criticizing the report, criticizing the way the task force went forward. And I think it was really unfair to everybody who put the time in. And sometimes you have to take that gut instinct and throw it out and say, what are these econometric models showing us? What are these transportation studies showing us? And how can we make this better? Now, a lot of areas, we're not reinventing the wheel. You can go to Potsdamer Platz in Berlin and see what a wonderful way they have above rail, below rail, and circulators working around for a great place to be. We've taken some of the best from Amsterdam, from Portland, some other areas, and taking those ideas and put them in this vision.
Yeah, during the process, we created several different planning scenarios so that we could test different elements and do some impact analysis. And at the end of the day, we found that the impact then prototype B, which is what George Mason University has now said would be the highest level of development one would expect by 2050, that transportation analysis shows that the new Tysons performs better than the today's Tysons. So the base case cannot compete with the transformed Tyson.
And we ask people to take a look at it. Don't look at the maximum number. That's not how this Tyson is going to grow. It's going to grow organically. Right. There's going to be incentives, and it's going to come up, and things are going to turn into and develop into a very nice place with the circulator, with the transit, and with the change of residents living in Tyson's Corner to be a livable, people-focused place.
Yeah, it's already been kind of interesting, George, in my day job. I've talked to, obviously, a lot of folks in the development community, and they're trying to get their arms around this new organic, vision-driven process. So sit down and say, well, am I going to have to negotiate this? Or, no, you're required to do that. Too long, since it's already been largely. Well, what about if I offer this? Well, you're required to do that. Well, how about if, no, that's a requirement. Well, how do I know that's a requirement? Because if you look on the map, this place is mixed use and it's got this much intensity and this is what you got to do.
So it's that specific.
And then not going to leave the end game to chance. It's a requirement. So the developer really knows what's expected of them. John talked about transparency. This is another element of that. And they can make the very simple choice. I want to build in Tysons or I don't.
Is there excitement in that community about this proposal and about this process?
Well, when they recover from watching the financial news, I'm sure they'll be terribly excited about it. Yeah, it's been widely embraced. We're now trying to go back recommendations just because we spent so many hours of personal time. I think they stand the test, and I'm looking forward to getting the Urban Land Institute or one of the area universities to take this plan, take a look at it, and say, does it pass muster what's importantly is we don't leave it to negotiations. We're not as a solid urban plan for transforming Tysons.
I think those who are looking for the cultural change, the bicyclists and those who are transit-oriented development, they're excited about it. And if you're a surrounding landowner, one of those neighborhoods, you should be excited because the value of your land is going to continue to go up. And that's going to be good for your bottom line, your personal real estate investment.
Close in Northern Virginia has become very much an urban landscape, except it still has the air of suburbia, as we talked about with the roads, the way the roads are, and you have to be in cars and the like. I think that there's a lot of, we'll draw a lot of young people into the Tysons area if you give them this kind of development. That's what's happened in that whole Boston, Clarendon courthouse corridor in Arlington.
Well, I think it'll attract young guys like you and me, George. I think I'm going to come a time when shoveling out, and I don't think these are great records. The driveway and raking the leaves and maybe having one too many bedrooms for all of my children to return to it might be nice to have a little more manageable lifestyle. So I think the diversity of housing will answer a lot of choices. I also think it's important to remember that there are 105,000, and when this plan's done, maybe almost 200,000 people that live in Tysons on a daily basis because they work there. So we have to make it a great environment to live in and to work in and to stay in. It has to be a place you don't come to planning to just, how quickly can I get out?
I think we could spend another hour on this subject. Unfortunately, we only have an hour. I want to thank both of you for joining us today. I think that the more we get this whole program, this plan, these recommendations out in front of the citizens, the better off we'll all be, and the better off the process will be. My guests today were Bill Likos, the President and CEO of the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce, and John Jennison, the former President of the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations. We were talking about transforming Tysons, vision and area-wide recommendations that was done by the Tysons Task Force. I urge you to take a look at it at the Fairfax County Government website, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.